It was just another Tuesday evening at JFK Airport. Thousands of people rushing to catch flights, dragging suitcases, checking phones, grabbing coffee. Nobody expected what was about to happen at Gate 14. Nobody knew that in the next 30 minutes an entire terminal would freeze, federal agents would be questioned, and one man's calm response would change everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. Zohran Mamdani stood near the boarding area, checking his phone one last time before his flight to Chicago. He wore a sharp black suit, red tie perfectly straight, looking like any other business traveler heading home after a long day of meetings. His boarding pass was ready. His bag was packed. Everything was routine, except it wasn't going to stay that way. Because across the terminal, 3 ICE agents had just spotted him. And for reasons that would soon become crystal clear, they were walking straight toward him. Now here's where things get interesting. Zohran had done nothing wrong. No warrants, no flags on his passport, no suspicious behavior. But that didn't matter to the agents approaching him. You see, what was about to unfold wasn't really about documents or security. It was about something much deeper. And the way Zohran chose to respond would reveal a truth that most people never get to see. The lead agent reached Zohran first. Passport, he demanded, not asked, demanded. His tone was cold, aggressive, like he'd already decided something before even looking at any documents. Zohran calmly reached into his jacket and handed it over. Of course, he said quietly. Now, most people in this situation would already feel their heart racing. The other 2 agents moved closer, forming a tight circle. One wore a tactical vest with bold white letters. Another adjusted black gloves slowly, deliberately. The third one smirked as he flipped through the passport pages. Well, the lead agent said loudly, making sure people nearby could hear. Look at this. Traveling alone tonight? Yes, Zohran replied. Business. The agent's eyes narrowed. Big man traveling alone must be real important. There was mockery in his voice, a subtle cruelty. And here's what most people don't realize about moments like this. It's not about the questions being asked. It's about the tone, the intention. The agents weren't looking for answers. They were looking for a reaction. But Zohran didn't give them one, not yet anyway. Is there an issue with my documents? He asked calmly. Maybe, the agent replied, snapping the passport shut but not returning it. Maybe not, depends. Passengers nearby started to notice. A woman charging her phone glanced over. A man holding coffee paused mid-sip. Something felt wrong. The energy had shifted. You look nervous, one agent said, stepping even closer into Zohran's personal space. I'm not nervous, Zohran answered. I'm just trying to board my flight. And that's when the lead agent said something that would change everything. We asked the questions, not you. The words hung in the air like a threat, but here's what you need to understand. Zohran had a choice in that moment. He could get defensive. He could raise his voice. He could demand to speak to a supervisor. Any of those reactions would have given the agents exactly what they wanted. An excuse. But Zohran understood something most people don't. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Just presence, just calm, just waiting. Where were you earlier today? Another agent demanded. In meetings. With who? Colleagues, the agent scoffed. That's vague. Zohran folded his hands loosely in front of him. It's accurate. More people were watching now. Phones were slowly being lifted, not obviously, but subtly. Recording lights flickered quietly. The agents hadn't noticed yet, but Zohran had. And he knew something they didn't. This moment wasn't private anymore. You know, the lead agent said, tapping the passport against his palm, we can delay this process if we want. I'm aware of your authority, Zohran replied steadily. But I also know my rights. Silence, complete silence. That one sentence shifted everything. The smirking stopped. The casual arrogance faltered, because suddenly the dynamic had changed. This wasn't just a passenger being questioned anymore. This was someone who understood the game and wasn't going to play it. You think this is funny? The agent snapped. I don't think it's funny, Zohran said. I think it's unnecessary. A murmur rippled through the small crowd forming nearby. He's right. Why are they pushing him? What did he even do? The lead agent's face hardened. Careful, he warned. Zohran's expression remained completely calm. I respect your position, he said clearly, his voice steady enough for everyone nearby to hear. But I also expect respect. Those words cut through the tension like a knife. For a moment, nobody moved. The agent lifted his finger and pointed it at Zohran's chest. You don't get to set the tone here. Zohran didn't look at the finger. He looked directly into the agent's eyes. I'm not setting a tone, he replied. I'm maintaining one. And that's when everything changed. Because a woman standing nearby suddenly spoke up. Why are you harassing him? She asked loudly. The agent spun toward her. Ma'am, step back, but she didn't step back. He hasn't done anything, she said, her voice stronger now. This doesn't concern you, an agent barked. It concerns everyone when someone's being singled out, she shot back. More voices joined in. He's cooperating. They're the ones escalating. This isn't right. Phones were fully visible now, openly recording. The agents exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were no longer in control. The situation had flipped. From across the terminal floor, a new figure emerged. An airport supervisor in a crisp navy blazer, badge clipped to her lapel, walking toward them with purpose. The agents hadn't noticed her yet, but Zohran had. He didn't smile, didn't gesture, just stood there calm as ever, because he knew what was coming, and what happened next would send shockwaves through the entire airport. "Is there a reason you've stopped this passenger?" the supervisor asked, her voice cutting through the noise. The lead agent turned. Routine inspection. The supervisor looked at the crowd, the phones, the tension thick in the air. "Routine inspections," she said calmly, "don't usually involve raised voices and public confrontation. We're federal," one agent stated, as if that ended all discussion. "And this is my terminal," the supervisor replied evenly. "I'm responsible for the environment here." Silence again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the silence of intimidation. It was the silence of accountability arriving. "What's the issue with the passenger?" she asked. "Random screening," an agent repeated. "Based on what?" The agents hesitated. "It's within our authority." "I'm not disputing your authority," the supervisor said. "I'm asking for the basis." That distinction mattered. Authority versus justification. Power versus reason. Airport security staff began positioning themselves nearby. Not aggressively, just present. The agents noticed. Their body language changed, less certain now, less aggressive. The supervisor turned to Zohran. "I've provided identification and answered questions," he said calmly. "If there's something specific you need, I'm willing to comply." "Thank you, sir," the supervisor nodded. Then she looked back at the agents. If this is a routine inspection, it should conclude routinely. The lead agent pulled out a radio and stepped aside, speaking quietly into it. His colleagues stood there, suddenly looking very aware of all the cameras pointed at them. The crowd waited. Zohran waited. Everyone waited. And then over the airport speakers, an announcement echoed across Terminal 4. "Attention passengers. Temporary security hold in Terminal 4. Please remain in place." We repeat, temporary security hold in Terminal 4. Everything stopped. Boarding lines froze. Rolling suitcases went silent. A child stopped talking mid-sentence. The entire terminal held its breath. Confusion spread like wildfire. What's happening? Is there a threat? Did something happen? The departure boards flickered from boarding to on hold. And that's when two figures entered from the far end of the terminal. Senior federal oversight officers, dark suits, visible badges, and expressions that meant business. The crowd parted instinctively. The oversight officers walked straight toward the scene. The lead ICE agent straightened. "What's this about?" One oversight officer stopped a few feet away. "Agents, step aside." The words weren't loud, but they were final. Now the officer repeated. After a long second, the agent stepped back. The oversight officer turned to Zohran. "Sir, are you willing to give a statement regarding this interaction?" "Yes," Zohran replied simply. The agents were then escorted to a private area. Not arrested, not handcuffed, but clearly no longer in control. The crowd watched in stunned silence. This wasn't how these situations usually ended. Usually the passenger apologizes, complies completely, and the agents walk away unchallenged. But not tonight. Tonight something different was happening. Tonight accountability had arrived, and nobody knew yet just how far this would go. The oversight officers took Zohran's statement. He spoke clearly, factually, without exaggeration. He described the approach, the tone, the escalation. He didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves, and dozens of videos were already circulating online. Hashtags were trending. News alerts were pinging on phones across the country. Airport confrontation. Federal agents under review. Man remains calm under pressure. The story was spreading beyond the terminal walls. After 30 minutes, another announcement came. "Passengers, thank you for your patience. Terminal 4 operations will resume shortly." A collective breath released. Boarding screens flickered back to life, but the atmosphere had permanently changed. People looked at each other differently now. They'd witnessed something important, not violence, not chaos, but something quieter and somehow more powerful. They'd seen what happens when dignity refuses to bend. Zohran returned to gate 14. Passengers made space for him respectfully. The woman who'd first spoken up smiled gently. "You okay?" "Yes," he replied softly. "Thank you." A man near the window gave him a small nod. Others looked at him not with pity or fear, but with recognition. He'd done something most people wish they could do. He'd stood his ground without losing his composure. He demanded respect without demanding anything at all. When his boarding group was called, Zohran stood calmly and walked to the gate. The gate agent paused briefly. "I hope the rest of your evening is peaceful," she said sincerely. "So do I," he smiled gently. He walked down the jet bridge, the sounds of the terminal fatting behind him. With each step, the tension released from his shoulders. But he knew the confrontation hadn't really ended. It had transformed, from public moment to institutional review, from live tension to formal consequence. He found his seat and placed his bag overhead. Looking out the window at the blinking runway lights, he finally allowed himself a deep breath. He hadn't shouted, hadn't threatened, hadn't retaliated, he'd simply stood still. And sometimes stillness is louder than any reaction. The plane began to taxi, other passengers settled in. The flight attendant made standard announcements. Everything felt normal again, but it wasn't normal, not really. Back in Terminal 4, conversations continued in hushed tones. Airport staff completed incident reports. Oversight officers finalized preliminary notes. And somewhere in a private office, the three ICE agents were answering questions they never expected to face. Questions about conduct, about tone, about why a routine check had escalated into a terminal-wide freeze, about why their authority had been challenged and found wanting. The next morning, Zohran woke up in his Chicago hotel to dozens of messages. Colleagues, friends, even strangers reaching out. The videos had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. News outlets were calling it a watershed moment, a perfect example of grace under pressure, of knowing your rights without being aggressive, of demanding dignity without losing your own. He read through some comments. This is how you handle intimidation. He never raised his voice once. This is what real strength looks like. But Zohran wasn't interested in becoming a viral sensation. He'd simply wanted to board his flight. He'd simply wanted to be treated with basic respect. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. And the fact that such a simple expectation had created such a massive response told him everything he needed to know about how broken the system had become. When dignity becomes remarkable, something is deeply wrong. 3 weeks later, an internal review concluded. The three ICE agents were suspended pending further investigation. Multiple complaints had surfaced from other passengers they'd confronted in similar ways. Patterns of behavior, patterns of intimidation, patterns that had gone unchecked for too long. The terminal supervisor received commendation for her intervention. Airport policy was updated to include mandatory de-escalation training. Federal oversight protocols were strengthened. And Zohran, he went back to his regular life, back to meetings and conferences and flights. But people recognized him now, not as a celebrity, but as someone who'd done something important. Someone who'd shown that you don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be aggressive to stand your ground. You just need to be present, calm, clear, and unwilling to accept disrespect as normal. The woman who'd first spoken up at the airport later wrote about her experience. She said she'd almost stayed silent, almost convinced herself it wasn't her business, but something in Zohran's calm demeanor had given her courage. If he could stand there with such composure under that pressure, she could speak up. And her speaking up had given others courage. That's how change happens. Not with one hero, but with collective witnessing, with people choosing presence over convenience. 6 months after the incident, new training programs were implemented across multiple airports. Role-playing scenarios, de-escalation techniques, respect protocols, accountability measures. The JFK incident, as it became known, was used as a case study. What went wrong? How could it have been prevented? What did the passenger do right? What should the agents have done differently? The answers seemed obvious in hindsight, but in the moment, power often blinds people to basic decency. Zohran gave one interview about the experience, just one. When asked what advice he'd give to others in similar situations, he paused for a long moment. Then he said, remember that authority without accountability is just power. And power unchecked always overreaches eventually. Your job isn't to challenge authority. Your job is to maintain your dignity. Everything else follows from that. The interviewer asked if he'd been scared. Of course, he admitted, but fear and composure aren't opposites. You can feel one and demonstrate the other. The video of that interview was shared widely. Teachers used it in classrooms. Community organizations used it in workshops. It became a teaching moment about civil rights, about respectful confrontation, about the difference between compliance and submission. Compliance means following lawful instructions. Submission means accepting mistreatment. Zohran had complied fully while refusing to submit. That distinction mattered. A year later, Terminal 4 at JFK looked exactly the same. Same polished floors, same overhead lights, same rolling suitcases and departure boards and coffee shops. But something had changed in the culture. Security staff interacted differently with passengers. There was more patience, more courtesy, more awareness that every interaction mattered, that phones were everywhere, that accountability was always watching, and that dignity, once demanded, couldn't be easily ignored. Zohran still travels frequently. He still goes through airports, through security, through the same terminals where he was once confronted. Sometimes people recognize him, sometimes they don't. Either way, he moves through the world with the same calm presence he showed that evening at Gate 14, Because for him, it was never about that one moment. It was about every moment, about choosing composure over reaction, about maintaining standards even when others don't. About remembering that how you respond to injustice reveals who you are. The three agents involved, they eventually left federal service, not fired but encouraged to pursue other career paths. Their names weren't publicly released, but their behavior had consequences. That mattered too, because systems only change when individuals face accountability, when patterns are disrupted, when someone finally says, no, this isn't acceptable, and enough people agree that the system has to respond. So what's the real lesson from that Tuesday evening at JFK? It's not that one man stood up to authority. It's that authority, when challenged calmly and publicly, had to answer for itself. It's that silence isn't always weakness and noise isn't always strength. It's that dignity maintained is more powerful than dignity demanded. It's that witnesses matter, that recording matters, that collective awareness creates accountability. And perhaps most importantly, it's that change doesn't always come from dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it comes from one person standing still while chaos swirls around them. From one person refusing to accept disrespect as normal. From one person modeling the behavior they want to see, even when it would be easier to react, to escalate, to fight fire with fire. Zohran showed that water puts out fire just as effectively, and it does so without becoming the fire itself. Today, if you walk through Terminal 4 at JFK, you might not think about what happened there. But the culture remembers, the policies remember, the training remembers, and every interaction between authority and citizen carries an echo of that moment when everything froze, when accountability arrived, and when one man's calm response proved that sometimes the quietest voice speaks the loudest truth. That respect isn't negotiable. That dignity isn't optional. And that power, no matter how confident, must always answer to the simple question, on what basis? That question changed everything. And it started with one man, three agents, and a choice to remain calm when everything else demanded chaos.